Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Do you mind if I ask you a personal question? Have you ever been Columboed? A week or so ago, I did a brief segment that I titled Stone in the Shoe, and I can take credit neither for the title nor the concept, as it was something that came from a book that I have been reading called Tactics. The book is written by Greg Koukl, who's a well-known apologist. And this segment as well is taken from the book as well. So please don't think that this is R.C. Sproul insight or wisdom. This is Greg Koukl insight and wisdom that I'm about to share with you. He not only encourages the stone in the shoe approach to apologetics and evangelism, he encourages the Columbo approach as well. Now, if you've never seen Columbo, then as soon as you're able, watch one. I think you'll be glad you did. Columbo is one of the greatest television shows ever. I actually have in my library a script from a episode of Columbo that had belonged to one of the actors on the show for a read-through, and it's marked up, and I'm the proud owner of it. I love the show, and many of you may remember that my father was quick to put on his own personal Columbo impression, and during the perm years, he kind of looked like Columbo a little bit. Well, the Columbo approach when it comes to evangelism and apologetics is a way of helping the person you're talking to relax. It's a way of getting their defenses to lower just a bit. And we do this by asking simple, non-accusatory questions. Most of us like to talk about ourselves. Most of us like to talk about what we believe. And if we, in a non-threatening way, invite people to do so, not giving them the impression, hey, we're about to pounce on your ideas, you may learn a thing or two. And in fact, even without saying a word, you may provoke thought in the mind of the one you're talking to. I know I've been there, not necessarily in an apologetic context, but have you ever had somebody ask you something, and the more you think about the answer, the more you realize, I haven't thought about this enough. I need to think this through a little bit more. And that's a great place to start. That's a great, if you will, stone in the shoe. Something for the person you're talking to carry with them and think through. But it also, again, establishes a rapport that communicates that, hey, we're not at war here. I have an interest in knowing about you, about your perspective, about your worldview. I want to understand it, and I'm here to listen. I'm not a threat to you. You understand that was the genius of Columbo. That was his style, his approach. That was the name of his game, that he showed up looking like the most inept, incapable detective in the world. In his wrinkled and stained overcoat, his beat-up old car, his stub of a cigar. And the killer was always so arrogant and so prideful, he couldn't believe his luck to have been assigned this particular doofus as the detective on the case. And that worked to have his guard down. It worked to make that pridefulness, that arrogance, cause the slip-up that revealed the truth. Well, again, I'm not asking that you pretend to be Columbo so that some ways into the conversation you can turn around and pounce and convict. I am saying something that my father said to me a long time ago. He said, son, when you get agitated and angry in an argument, you may think that what you're communicating is the force of your convictions. But really what you're communicating is your own insecurity and uncertainty. When we stay peaceful, when we stay calm, when we stay quiet, when we ask questions, when we don't pounce, we make the progress of the conversation more likely, more possible. Now, I'm not saying this is easy, because the truth of the matter is the devil is always at work in us. He's always pushing us, and we don't even need his help. We're prideful enough as it is, but that's what happens. We get into these discussions, we get into these arguments, and all of a sudden we want to win. We want to score points. We want to defeat our foe. And we forget that we're there to tell someone who was just like us about Jesus. So let's learn to take that Columbo approach. Let's, when we're talking to our unbelieving friends, ask them a question. And then maybe after we're almost finished, as we're walking away, we stop, we scratch our head, and we say, well, I'm sorry. I know I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and I must be missing something, but I'm really having a hard time understanding how what you say here could be true, and this thing that we both agree is true can be true. Can you help me understand that? That's so much better than, hey, you just committed the Ipsy-Dixit fallacy. Hey, you're a big doofus who doesn't know what he's talking about. Ha 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 ha. You're a dumb idiot. No, gentle, quiet, probing questions. That's how Columbo can be used to help us tell others about Jesus. We are almost finished with our look together through the Ten Commandments as we come today to our first look at the 10th commandment, which reads, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's." It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? But there's something profoundly unusual about this, the 10th and last of the 10 commandments. It's something that I've hinted at along the way as we've made our way through the 10 commandments, that we would get here and we would discover something important. To remember what that is, I've got to take us back once again to Jesus' delivering of the law on the Sermon on the Mount. There are connections, similarities between this sermon that Jesus delivers and the 10 Commandments. Jesus is speaking to God's people from a mount. He's talking to them about life in the kingdom, just as God is talking to the children of Israel just before they're going to go into the promised land and talking about what life should be like in that land. Now, it's in that context that Jesus says, "You've heard it said, you shall not murder, but I say to you that anyone who hates his brother without just cause has broken this commandment." Or, "You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that anyone who lusts after another in his heart is guilty of violating this commandment." Jesus is taking the narrow, specific, simply and only visible, external expression of the law and affirming, hey, that's not how it is. It includes the disposition of your heart and of your mind. That's contained inside this law. Jesus isn't adding to the 10 Commandments. He's simply demonstrating or affirming what was always there, but which had been, in a manner of speaking, suppressed or pushed down by the Pharisees. This is why, friends, all the time, legalism always leads to antinomianism. I know that seems counterintuitive, legalism being the view that suggests that we have peace with God by our obedience to his law. Antinomianism saying we already have peace with God and we don't have to keep his law. They seem like polar opposites. Well, how can legalism lead to antinomianism? It's very simple. If I take the view that the only way I can have peace with God is if I obey everything that he commands, then I better get busy trying to reduce what he's commanded. The more extensive and broad the law is, the more certain I am to fail. There are countless people in this world. I mean, billions of people in this world. The vast majority of people in this world have gone through their lives without committing first-degree murder, and a slightly less high number have gone through their lives without committing adultery, in that narrow sense. But there's no one who's kept themselves from lusting in their heart. There's no one who's kept themselves from hating their brother unjustly. We're all guilty. Well, the last time we were working our way through the sin stones, we were at, of course, the 9th commandment, and we talked about how, actually, I need to go back to the 8th commandment. It's the 8th commandment that says, thou shalt not steal. Well, and I suggested then that actually this particular commandment already comes equipped with the kind of exposition Jesus gave in the Sermon on the Mount, only this time it comes at the giving of the 10 Commandments. That is, look at it this way. Theft is to covet what murder is to unjust hatred, and physical adultery is to lusting in your heart. It's the same thing. Coveting is the internal version of what theft is. And Jesus tells us that it's out of the heart that our actions spring. So this isn't just, oh, by the way, here's something else that I want you not to do. Here's something else that's important. This 10th commandment is that reminder to the original audience, hey, all of these laws extend into our hearts and our minds. And how well we do in the visible, physical realm will be determined ultimately by how we guard our hearts and minds. As a man thinks in his heart, the scripture says, so he is. And so here God tells us, hey, I'm not just talking about your behavior. I'm talking about your attitude. I'm talking about your perspective. I'm talking about your desires. You know, because, friends, Jesus changes everything. He doesn't just change our outward behavior. He also changes our hearts and our minds. Now, the next time, which will probably be the last of the Sin Stones series, the next time we're going to, of course, stay here in the 10th commandment, but we're going to consider not just how the 10th commandment relates to the 8th commandment, but in the end of the day, how the 10th commandment relates to all the commandments. I look forward to that conversation. I always find it a little strange that I have a deep appreciation for that musical style that's sometimes called Americana, sometimes called old time. This is the style of music that was played in O Brother, Where Art Thou? It gave birth to bluegrass, which I don't much care for. And bluegrass gave birth to, I don't even know what you would call it, Newgrass maybe, but artists like Nickel Creek or Alison Krauss and Union Station, which I love that too. So I like the oldest thing. I like the grandfather. I don't like the father. I love the son. I like, so what's up with that? And I think the reason for that is that bluegrass is so committed to giving musicians the opportunity to demonstrate their skill that they, to some degree, lose sight of the song. I've heard bluegrass musicians, I've talked to bluegrass musicians, and I said, I really think you need to stop playing your instrument and start playing the song. Well, easy for me to give my criticism since I only know 3 chords on the mandolin. But I mention all this because on today's Curating Your Book Library, I want to speak in defense of showing off, not musically, but literarily. You see, I just finished reading The Martian Chronicles, written by Ray Bradbury. Now, I have read The Illustrated Man in the past. I think in high school I tried Dandelion Wine, but put it down. But I had not read The Martian Chronicles. Oh, and of course I have read Something Wicked This Way Comes, and absolutely adore the movie and watch it every year. So I picked up The Martian Chronicles and thought, well, I should read this. And it's got several things going for it. One, it's Ray Bradbury. 2, it's science fiction. But as I began to read it, I began to feel like, there's just not enough coherent story here. There's not enough plot. The plot's not, it's just not there. And I got a little bit annoyed, and I began to think about that bluegrass music. But then, as I continued reading, oh my stars, I didn't fall in love with The Martian Chronicles, but I fell in love even more deeply with Ray Bradbury. My stars, did that man have a way with words. He is an artist. That doesn't mean he's highbrow and he's intellectual. He's not. It's not that it's so good because it's got such a powerful message. It's good because it's beautiful writing. His descriptions are just breathtaking. Now, I'll confess, I would like there to have been more plot. I would like to have been more engaged in the actual story. And reading The Martian Chronicles for that is probably not the best way to go. It's certainly possible, though it's been a long time since I've read it, that The Illustrated Man would be the ideal balance of those two things. But The Illustrated Man is actually a collection of short stories with a very thin strand connecting all of those stories. This one, again, is not plot heavy at all, but it is poetic. It is evocative. It brings out feelings. Now, I don't know whether I'm going to cover it again. I remember that I save to watch, and I saved it to cover it on the Jesus Changes Everything podcast. Something Wicked This Way Comes until fall, typically late fall. And I've said about that movie that it smells like fall. Well, when you read The Martian Chronicles, you don't have that exact same experience, but you get a bunch of little similar experiences where you breathe in, or you smell this ethos. You take in, well, a sense of wonder, a sense of homesickness and nostalgia. You take in, well, what I believe at the end of the day is going to be the spirit of Ray Bradbury. He was a man who didn't write about himself, but who nevertheless poured himself through the words that he wrote. There's not, by the way, not only is there not a lot of plot, the whole science fiction, the science element of science fiction is also very sparse. There's not a lot of exploration of complex technologies or examinations of how messages are beamed across space or people sent across space. None of that's there. It has all the technological sophistication of an episode of The Twilight Zone. Which is to say, not much. But again, I don't mind. I don't mind at all. If you want to know about what life might be like on Mars if a day comes when it's being colonized by humans, this is not the place to go. But if you want to lay down in a meadow and smell honeysuckle, and hear the chirping of crickets, and feel the faint coldness that tells you fall is coming. If that's the experience you're looking for, pick up the Martian Chronicles and read. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.